Chris Farfoy.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, for the chance to speak to this second reading of the Credit Contracts and Financial Services Law Reform Bill. Mr Speaker, like the Minister of Pacific Island Affairs, Sam Lotuinga, I also represent a community that is disproportionately affected by the kind of behaviour that is carried on by third-tier lenders, or as we like to colloquially call them, loan sharks, and also the likes of, I guess they would call themselves mobile traders, who we like to call truck shops. And Mr Speaker, it is not fair in anyone's game, anyone in New Zealand, any fair-minded New Zealander, Mr Speaker, that interest rates of the likes of 50 to 100% or even further are charged to people, vulnerable people in our community. I think if you ask any fair-minded New Zealander who wants a fair go for consumers, especially for those who are vulnerable and can't get credit from the likes of the traditional banks, that getting charged 50 to 100% in interest is just not fair. And it lands a whole lot of the families, and as I say, there are a lot of families in my community who kind of sign up to those kinds of deals in massive trouble. And it usually ends up them going to the likes of the local Citizens Advice Bureau or the Porirua Budgeting Services, and I'm going to see Agape Budget Services tomorrow in Porirua. And those are the kinds of people that end up dealing with the rubbish or the hurt with the families, because the likes of third-tier lenders or loan sharks are able to charge exorbitant interest rates. And the government has missed an opportunity while we're supporting this piece of legislation. This is a massive opportunity gone for this government to take some real action to introduce interest rate caps. And I do want to acknowledge my colleague Carol Beaumont, who has a number of supplementary order papers in for this bill, but one specifically does do what the government should have done, and that is look at interest rate caps in their introduction. And Mr Speaker, I think it was Mr Lotuinga who said that these interest caps don't work. So maybe Mr Lotuinga would like to ask the likes of many countries in Europe, Mexico, Canada, South Africa, Japan, Singapore, a government that this government always says is doing a good job financially, the US, Australia and most recently the United Kingdom, as to why they think it's appropriate to put interest rate caps in for third-tier lenders. Because I think those governments probably recognise the fact that there's huge public interest in making sure the most vulnerable in our communities aren't stung more by the likes of interest rates of 500 to 100%. So essentially what we're saying here is this side of the House is not okay with the most vulnerable people in our community going to third-tier lenders and saying and having interest rates of 50 to 100% or more, but that side of the House, the government, National, United, Future and ACT, are quite okay for people who can't probably even afford to take out these loans to have these huge, exorbitant interest rates. So that's exactly what this boils down to. We're not okay with it, but that government is okay with it. And all the hurt that the likes of budget services around the country see from now on can be blamed on that government, because they're quite okay with letting things go as they are now. Or one person in this House, the Honourable Peter Dunn, can change his mind again. He can change his mind again. Because Andrew Little said, Mr Dunn back in 2010 supported a member's bill in the name of Carol Beaumont, which would introduce interest rate caps. And I want to quote from the same letter that Mr Little, that Mr thank you, quoted from. And it is actually, I want to declare somewhat of a conflict of interest. This letter is to Mr Andrew Shan, who was a constituent of mine, also works for me part-time, but well into the past has been campaigning against third-tier lenders and also to make sure interest rates caps can come in. And you can crow over there because you guys are okay with 50% or 100% interest rates. You're okay with it. I'm not okay with it. You guys are the ones that are okay with it. And I just want to say that Mr Dunn wasn't okay with it 4 years ago, because he said he was okay. I was very pleased to hear from you, and thank you for taking time to read. I support the bill and was very sorry that it did not pass the first reading. So 4 years ago, Mr Dunn was not okay. with exorbitant interest rates. But now that he's got the Crown card back and he's back in his ministerial office, he's towing the party line, and he is all of a sudden not okay with caps on interest rates. So I would suggest, if people are watching this debate, and I'm sure a lot of people around the country who are interested in making sure that... He's a retiring member. So, Mr. Speaker, those people who are interested in making sure we look after looking after vulnerable people can put a lot of pressure on Mr. Dunn to change his mind again, because he is the one vote that could change this whole thing. Peter Dunn in 2010 said he was okay with interest rate caps, but now that he's back in the House with the government, he's not okay with it. So write letters, peter.dunn@parliament.govt.nz. Send him a letter. It's free post. Peter Dunn, the Honourable Peter Dunn. If you are not okay with 50 to 100% or more interest rates, write Peter Dunn a letter. Send him an email or bombard his office with phone calls, because he is the one who can change this whole situation. The government hasn't showed any leadership on this. It is dead against interest rate caps, Mr. Speaker. It doesn't want to introduce them, but there's one person in this House who can change everything. I fear that he may not change his mind, because what did he do with asset sales? He made sure he voted for that, and that squeaked through with one vote, Mr. Speaker. But I don't want to discourage people to try and get Peter Dunn to change his mind on this. Mr. Speaker, can I just take a brief moment, because this was the first substantive piece of legislation that I sat through on the Commerce Committee, and thank other members of the Commerce Committee. It was a relatively good process. We had the odd stoush, nothing compared to what we're having recently. But also, can I thank the officials too, because as the chair of the Select Committee, Jonathan Young, said, it is very technical, but I think the way that the officials guided us through this process made it very plain sailing for someone who had to make sense of this as a new member to the Select Committee. Mr. Chair, I do represent a community where the effects of loan sharks and truck shops do have a disproportionate effect. And while I support this piece of legislation, I do think, as I've said before, we've missed an opportunity to make the lives of those people better. I have had people in my office who have been in tears because of the interest rates and the debt that they've got themselves into with loan sharks. And I can't do much more than offer the services of a budgetary advice, budgetary service, and that is heartbreaking, Mr. Speaker, because I think this government, this Parliament, should be able to do something to prevent people getting into those situations, and I think that the interest rate cap certainly would have been one of those ways. There's also one person I do want to thank who isn't in this House anymore, Mr. Speaker, and that is Charles Chauvel. Before he left this House, he also took a very strong leadership role in the Oharu electorate, which Mr. Dunn is the MP for, and making sure that this issue was brought to the fore, because it was actually 5 years ago, when the effects of the global financial crisis started kicking in, that this really started to hit home, especially with our most vulnerable people in our communities. And as Sam Nutuinga said, he put in a members' bill 3 years ago. And 3 years ago was 3 years ago, and we're sitting here today 6 months before an election, and something is only being done about it now. So my question is, why did it take so long for this government to get off its chuff and make sure something was done, to make sure that something was done for these most vulnerable people? So we've still got the committee stages of this debate to go, Mr. Speaker, and I suggest that question may be a very strong theme in that debate as to why it took so long for this government to do something, because during that time, Mr. Speaker, a lot of families up and down this country, and certainly in my electorate of Mana, have been put through harm that I don't think they necessarily should have been put through. They're in debt. That affects their daily lives, it affects what they can do with their kids and their families, and if this government had acted a little bit sooner to put some protections in place for them, Mr. Speaker, their lives could have been markedly different. I just want to finish up with this thing. There is one vote in this House that can change it. We're not okay with 50 to 100% or more interest rates on this side of the House. If this government doesn't support the SOP of Carol Beaumont, that pretty much says that government is.
Louise Upson. Thank you, Mr Speaker. In light of the state reception that is to committee